Dorie Clark, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Hey, Howie, so good to be talking with you.
Yeah, I feel sorry for everyone who's just tuning in now because we've had so much fun just before I hit record.
That's right. I know we've been partying hard, but I think we can keep up the pace.
Yeah, and I've been like following your work for a while, and you're very buttoned down, like you're very professional. I watched some TED Talks and read your book, and I got a sense that you're a funny, exuberant person, but you're firing on all cylinders today. So I'm just smiling ear to ear.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So there's a ton to talk about. Originally, I was like, okay, well, let's talk about Dorie's new book, The Long Game. And so I started reading it, and I started, making my notes. And then the notes that I have here, and I read it actually like a month and a half ago. So the whole thing is not like up in my head right now, but I've got Broadway producer, jazz album, stand-up comedian, graduate degree in theology, grew up in rural North Carolina. And I'm like, I just want to talk about that first. So
that's right. Yeah. Anywhere you want to go, Howie.
So what was like, let's start with growing up in rural North Carolina. Whereabouts and what was it like?
Well, so I grew up in Pinehurst. So, to be fair, rural is a slight exaggeration, but it's extreme small town, North Carolina. So Pinehurst is best known as a golf resort. So it's much bigger now. It's grown quite a bit since I have left. But it basically was a golf retirement community that I grew up in, which is, admittedly a weird place to grow up. So I did not like it.
Okay. And what were you doing there?
Well, as is often the case, we are the victims of our parents' best choices. So they thought it would be so great to move to a place where they could golf all the time. So they had been they're both from Massachusetts, and they thought, hey, let's get out of winter. Let's go to this, fantabulous golf resort. And then they had me when they were there. So I ended up growing up in Pinehurst, which is not the fate that I would have chosen for myself. But, there you go.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think my kids can empathize because we moved down here to Pittsburgh, which is pretty rural. Like we had 3 neighbors within walking distance, and they were, teenagers, and they did not think, we're like, oh, look at all this land, how beautiful it is, how quiet. And they're like, this is not what we need.
Yeah, it's true. It's so hard in a family context because everybody has a slightly different agenda, and you can't meet them all. That's for sure.
So what were you into? Obviously not golf.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I was actually really into sports. This is one of the things we were talking about, your athleticism, but I played all of the sort of local recreational sports. So I did baseball and soccer and basketball, and then when I got a little older, I did volleyball. So that was really fun for me. Also, I think in a lot of ways, you hear this sometimes, but I think it's actually true that basically mostly you kind of grow up, if you're lucky, to do the same things that you like to do when you were like 9 or 10. So I used to like to write a lot. I would write stories, and I was really interested in being a published writer and things like that. So I feel lucky that I've gotten to kind of fulfill that. Now, where did you grow up, Howie?
I grew up in South Orange, New Jersey.
All right. And what was your big thing growing up?
Well, depends when. Like as a kid, my big thing was just being weird.
Awesome.
It wasn't. It didn't. It serves me well now, but I got into ultimate Frisbee.
Oh,
really
I feel
really
like
early.
ultimate Frisbee. Yeah, I mean that you must have been in the earliest wave of that, because I feel like, things were very slow coming to Pinehurst, but it was definitely not at Pinehurst when I was a kid. So yeah, that's pretty cool. You were like on the bleeding edge of the Frisbee world.
Well, it didn't feel like it. It's like, but now, like, I think back 20 years or 30 years to, like, 1990 seems pretty recent. But like when I was started playing ultimate frisbee, it was 1977. The sport was not 10 years old. But I didn't know that. It was just like, it exists. And so I really was, because it was invented in my high school,
Oh my
in
God,
68,
really?
69. Then I was playing 7, 8 years later.
That's amazing.
So yeah, I guess, I kind of was. Yeah.
That's super cool.
Yeah,
That's
it was, and we were the first generation. Like there was, it was a hippie sport. We were the first generation that was trying to be athletic about it. Right. So now if you go to, watch people play or go on YouTube and there's professional league, like, it's now an athletic thing. Like in the day, it was sort of, we were transitioning. We were like stage crew. There was like hippie stoners, and then there was like soccer players, and we were in the middle. We were like chess club, stage crew, math team.
That's awesome.
So that was my thing.
Wow, that's a good history lesson. I had no idea like where or when it was invented. I just knew it was a relatively recent vintage.
So what I wanted to ask you, when I cut out, I was saying, for me, when I was a kid playing sports, it was very much an identity thing. Like if I didn't win, it was terrible. And knowing the work you do around helping people like achieve things, but you also have this edge of soul, like be aware of what you're going for and achieve important things that are meaningful and good, and not just, like we can coach people just for the sake of success. I'm wondering, for you as someone who is really into sports, what was your relationship with winning and losing?
It's interesting. Sometimes people sort of assume that I'm a really competitive person. Like, somehow they maybe have a frame of like, oh, if you're reasonably successful, you must be very competitive and that's how you get to it or something like that. But I'm actually not. I mean, like anybody else, winning is nice. Winning is good. And I enjoy doing that. But I never like beat myself up about it if I didn't win. Also, like I really liked sports, but also I had really bad asthma when I was a kid. And so it was really clear that like the level that I should be aspiring to is like be decent and not embarrassing, not like you're going to be the best. Like it was just so obvious. I was never going to be the best at it. And so I was just fine with it. I was really, fine. I wanted to have a good time. I wanted to win if we could. And if we couldn't, well, I mean, I am a really big believer in almost sort of a sappy way of the value of youth sports participation. And it makes me so glad, honestly, that I grew up in a time of Title IX. There were still not a lot of girls involved. Like there was like me and one other girl on the soccer team, Now, of course, it's like much more.
But I just pictured a girl soccer team.
No, it was like me and Christy and a bunch of boys. But yeah, it was a boys basketball team, it was a boys baseball team. Yeah, that was what we had. That was it. So yeah, but I really love just the maxims of it, that like all the stuff that your coaches would tell you, perhaps just because they're like supposed to tell a group of 8-year-olds this, but like maybe as people get older, they don't really believe it, but it's like so wise. It's so true. It's like, you need to learn to be a good loser. Like that's actually how, like, that's the mark of character is like, how do you behave when you don't win? Because you're not always going to win. Or, like you hustle as hard as you can, but if it doesn't work, you don't beat yourself up about it. Like you just know, okay, I did as well as I could. I feel proud of that. Good. You know, I think that actually some of the most powerful lessons for me in life and also in business life are just about the ethics of how you comport yourself with other people based on these, like, kind of funny bromides of youth sports.
That's interesting because like the thing that made ultimate frisbee different
Mm.
from any other sport was there's a clause called spirit of the game, which initially was basically if you're not having fun, you should not be playing. Like it's not an officially legally sanctioned game if people are pissed off at each other or pissed off at themselves. And we've never had referees. Even in the professional league, they have observers and they help mediate the players to decide, was that a foul? Was that, a travel? And so the idea that, you're doing it for a higher purpose than just the score. I wonder as you made your way in the business world and became a support to leaders, did you see like people who needed to learn that lesson?
I mean, certainly there are plenty of people that are so competitive. I mean, we've all seen that, to a detrimental extent. It could be because they're competitive about things that are just not worth being competitive about. I mean, there's plenty of people like that, right? Like, they've got to be right about, whatever. Like, was it John Cusack or was it Nicolas Cage in that movie? And it's like a battle to the death. It's like, who gives a crap? But, and then you have people who are so competitive that even, past the point of reason, they will, kind of keep going. And then they have people who are so competitive that if it doesn't work, even through no fault of their own, they will just beat themselves up and feel terrible. And all of those things are bad. I mean, I think that one of the best gifts that I think that youth sports gives is, because the world wants to be gentle with kids, right? Like nobody wants to see some 8-year-old feeling terrible about themselves. And so we're gentle in a way that we're often not with adults. But I think that we need to embrace a little bit more of that. I mean, of course I'm all about, going hard and getting it done, but it's also equally true. There are exigent circumstances sometimes, and we have to, sort of like with the serenity prayer, right? You control what you can control and, feel perfectly responsible within those parameters. That's fine. You should. But if there are things that you cannot control, it is a waste of time and energy for you to feel bad about them. You can deal with it, you can move on, but you can't, lacerate yourself or flagellate yourself for things that you just really had no control or influence over.
How do you help people who are trapped in those sort of hyper competitive mindsets where anything other than ultimate victory is somehow a self-condemnation?
Well, it's certainly not easy, as you might imagine. I mean, I think one part that you can do is to introduce an alternative narrative, because for some folks, they really have never considered that there's an alternative narrative. Their way of seeing the world is the way that the world is. And so when you present an alternative about, have you thought of it this way? Because I actually think of it this way. For a certain percentage, it's like, oh, wait a minute, there's another way to be. There's another, rational way of thinking about it that a not crazy person would have. And so sometimes that can disrupt things in a positive way. But I think the harder part is for a lot of people, they might accept that other people view things differently. They might accept intellectually that there's another way of thinking about things, but then they say, well, I have to think about it this way because otherwise I will lose my edge, or otherwise I won't be able to perform, because they believe that their hyper competitiveness is their secret sauce. that gives them the power to accomplish what they need to do. And if they get rid of that, then they are throwing out everything, and they will be lazy and ineffective, basically, which, on the face of it, of course, is not correct. You're not going to give somebody an overnight personality transplant where suddenly they become indolent, if they've been a hyper competitive person before. But that's the part that they worry about. And so I think sometimes what can be helpful is if they can have somebody to talk to who has been in that situation before, because coming at someone is rarely effective. You often have to sort of come in the side door. And one way to come in the side door is for someone like them to be like, well, I used to think about it that way, but here's how I think about it now. And, I don't know if it would work for you, but this worked for me. That can perhaps be helpful. But how do you think about all this, Howie?
I don't really know. That's why I'm asking you. Like, I was thinking about, like maybe they're right that there is some edge that they get that they would lose. But I'm thinking about, like, there've been all these documentaries lately about, like, incredibly driven people, like the Last Dance, Michael Jordan. There's a series about, I think, an HBO series about the Lakers that has a central theme is Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, both like obsessing about the other one because they were both rookies at the same time and they were played in college and one beat the other. And you can clearly see how it drove them to become better than anybody else. And yet I wonder, like, is it worth it? Like, are there, I think of, like, the word excellence. Like, everyone wants to be excellent, from Tom Peters In Search of Excellence to, every company wants to be excellent. But the root of it is to excel means to be better than someone else, which has, like, this inherent competitive thing. I mean, this is the first time we really talked, but seeing your spirit around the networking group that we're a part of, all you do is raise other people up. Like, you've got a podcast, like, as you say, like, you're not competitive in terms of, like, you want to see the people around you succeed. And that's kind of how the life and the career you've created. I'm sure with your skills and talents and personality, you could have done it very differently. You could be, a billionaire entrepreneur. And so, like, I'm wondering, what is there a cost to the, excellence?
Well, it's interesting. I was recently reading, and I loved it. I was totally into it. Arnold Schwarzenegger's memoir. It came out about a decade ago. It's called Total Recall, as it should be, clearly. And it was so fascinating to hear about how he became a bodybuilding champion. I mean, obviously, this is a pretty intense guy in all the different aspects of his life, but one area where it first manifested, sort of his first career success was as a bodybuilder. And he was working out a minimum of 4 hours a day and sometimes up to 6 hours a day. And I mean, it's extremely impressive in the sense that, just like, for most quote unquote normal people, even like getting to the gym like 2 or 3 times a week is a victory. And so, he's doing this like 6 hours a day. This obviously not easy stuff. He's pushing himself, he's hurting himself in order to build muscle. And so on one hand, I am so proud of and happy for anyone who really has a goal and has the guts and the persistence to really go for it. I mean, he maxed it out. He knew what he wanted to do and he did it. And I think that's so commendable. And also, it's equally true that looking at it, I'm just like, wow, that literally just does not ever appeal to me. I mean, I guess, like, if the choice is like, whatever, do you want to, be imprisoned or do you want to work out 6 hours a day? Then I guess I'd pick 6 hours a day, but it would almost be like a draw. It would just be like so awful. Or, like, I spent a summer when I was in high school at the North Carolina School for the Arts, which it now has a new name. the North Carolina College of the Arts.
Where's that, like in Winston-Salem?
Yeah, it's in Winston-Salem.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I was studying classical guitar. And anyway, I was not great. I was okay. And I looked at the people who were great, and they were similar to Arnold. They were practicing 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day on their instruments. And I just, it was so clear. It was so completely clear. I'm just like, I am extraordinarily uninterested in being the best. Like if that is what it takes, like that just sounds so freaking boring to me, to play whatever, the oboe for 8 hours a day. Like, kill me now. No.
Yeah.
No. So I commend the people who do it, but I was extremely clear. Yeah, that's the path to excellence that's not my path.
Yeah, it's I'm so looking forward to playing this excerpt for my son, who he's 22, and when he was in high school, he was a classical guitarist, and he was like the best classical guitarist in town, right? And he practiced like half an hour a day. You know, he had skill and a really good teacher, and half an hour a day was enough. And so then he decided to go to this guitar program in New York at NYU, a Manus guitar program. And he met those people who were playing 6-8 hours a day. And again, he's like what he got was like, I love, he would say, I love music. These people are driven by something other than a love of music at this point.
Yes, that's totally right. It's a kind of monomania that I found unappealing for my personality type. Like, in order to be the world's best, you have to be so singularly focused on something as a goal that literally just everything else fades away. And that's, any other hobby, any other pursuit, it's your family, it's your, dating, it's, whatever, it's all subsumed under it. I just wasn't interested. But I feel like the bright side is that, to your point, Howie, about, your son was practicing half an hour a day and he was the best, in the community. It's actually surprisingly not hard to become one of the best. Becoming the best is extremely hard, but becoming one of the best is actually less taxing than you might imagine. And you can actually get pretty far by being one of the best. And especially if you build in a niche, or you sort of add something to it, some special sauce, some training, some overlap, or whatever, you can really carve out a fascinating and distinctive niche for yourself that can be successful without you having to compete against a pool of like millions of people who want to be the best guitarist or the best bodybuilder or what have you.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like there's two different 80-20s going on here, right? One is that there's sort of a winner take all. Like, it was really important for Google to be slightly better than Alta Vista in 1998, and then they, became the 95.5 behemoth from that slight edge. And we see, if you do 80-20 analysis on like income of athletes, right? Like the top tennis player in the world probably makes, the top 3 make more money than all the rest on the tour. But also there's the 80-20 of like half an hour a day is sort of an 80-20 to like the amount, the 8 hours a day you'd have to put in to play Carnegie Hall.
Totally. And what most people don't recognize is even Carnegie Hall, you can rent it. If you have enough money, you can rent that sucker and you can play at Carnegie Hall.
Tell us that story.
Well, I've never rented Carnegie Hall, but actually one of the stories that I tell in the long game from a good friend of mine, my composing partner that I work with on musical theater, which is one of the hats that I wear, she rented Carnegie Hall a number of years ago. And, it's not cheap. She was fundraising and everything. It cost like maybe 40 grand, all in with musicians. And, you got all these unions for like, if you want to flick on the lights, you need a union person to do it and blah, blah, blah. So it's not inexpensive for sure, but she was a struggling jazz musician. And by cobbling together grants and donations and stuff, she managed to be able to do it. But I think it's really useful to just recognize that, because oftentimes, again, people seem to think there's one way of getting somewhere. I know you're, sort of making a point, but people often think, oh, I'll never get to play Carnegie Hall unless I'm literally the world's best classical guitarist. Well, the answer is, yeah, if you're the world's best classical guitarist, you can play Carnegie Hall, almost certainly. And also, if you can find a clever way to gin up 40 grand, you can also play Carnegie Hall. And as long as you have been practicing a half hour a day for years on end, so you don't embarrass yourself, you'll probably do great.
Yeah. Well, what I love about that story is that, Carnegie Hall is not an objective measure. It's a bunch of gatekeepers, right? It's a bunch of people who got together and said, we're going to decide, what's at the top here. And so being able to tweak that a little bit and say, let's democratize what used to be an extremely democratic thing. Like in your little town, you'd have some musicians, right? Before, Victrolas. If you wanted music, you had local people. And, like people would learn to play an instrument just so they could, support their community in entertainment. And if people are bored, we can all gather around the piano and sing. That there's something really lovely about seeking excellence or seeking accomplishment for the community as opposed to just for yourself.
Yeah, that's great.
So another thing I wanted to ask you about was divinity school. Like, what led you there?
Well, I went to divinity school really for two reasons. One was I was a philosophy major as an undergraduate, and I was very interested in existential questions, Howie. So I decided that studying theology would be a good way to continue pursuing that. And then the second reason was I was very interested in politics, and the sort of Christian right wing was very ascendant in that time period politically, which was relatively new because in the 70s, 60s, 70s, it was really like, let's stay out of that. Let's stay out of these kind of worldly issues. And then from the late 70s onward, there was a big political shift to increase involvement. And I thought that was interesting, and I wanted to understand more about that phenomenon. So I decided that this would be a good way that I could study it.
And did you study at a divinity school that was leaning right wing?
No. I mean, I was at Harvard Divinity School, which is a pretty, I guess you could say left wing div school. It's, it was, interestingly enough, I mean, little known fact, Harvard Divinity School, I mean, Harvard in general, frankly, was founded to train ministers, Puritan ministers. And then eventually, the div school per se was founded. And everybody sort of reflexively thinks of the Puritans as these like sort of terrible fundamentalist, like hard ass people, which, perhaps they were in their own day. Although one of the scholars that I studied with, David Hall, actually showed that a lot of the people who were Puritans, I mean, like anything, there were some people that were super hardcore, but a lot of the Puritans, like the only reason they went to church is like so that their kids could be baptized. Like they just were not into it at all. They're just like, just like people today, like, okay, I guess I'll do it, which was fascinating because we think of sort of the lot of them as being almost fundamentalist, but that's not really how it was. But anyway, the Puritan faith, actually over the years, I mean, like, where did the Puritans go? There's not a Puritan religion today per se, but actually where it evolved to is the Puritans became two modern religious denominations, which is the Unitarian Universalists and United Church of Christ, which are basically the two most liberal Protestant denominations we have. Unitarians pretty much aren't even Christian anymore. Like some of them are, but I mean, the whole premise of Unitarian is that they're not Trinitarian, which means they're a little bit in violation of some central Christian dogma. So it's super fascinating in terms of how we think about what Puritans are or were. So anyway, I was interested in all of that.
I was suddenly thinking about it, like, until you said that, I totally had that prejudice about, Puritans. And yet I'm so, as a historian and as a history major, I'm suddenly realizing, so we got that from texts in which, Cotton Mather or whoever is excoriating sinners, which means there were sinners.
That's right. That's right. Like the regular lay people were just like, oh, I want to sleep in,
Right. Whatever he said that we're like quaking in was because there were people who needed to hear it, in his opinion.
Totally.
That's great.
So when you were studying religion, what were you studying? What did your personal curriculum look like, Howie?
So, so I grew up, sort of mainstream suburban Jewish, which was very interesting because it was very important to be culturally Jewish, and it was kind of embarrassing to believe in God. So, that was all very interesting. Then when I went to college, I studied history, but in a religious context. I was looking at the attempts by the Romans to rebuild the Jerusalem temple in the 4th century. And this was this Emperor Julian, who is the apostate, who is the last non-Christian emperor, who came in after 3 or 4 Christian emperors, and he wanted to bring everything back to the way it was, to restore Roman glory, Zeus and Hera and all those folks. And what Jews thought about temple versus synagogue, because they'd already had, the temple was destroyed. They're really sad about that. And they're really glad at the same time, because what a pain in the ass to have go to Jerusalem, to have a priestly class, to have sacrifices, to have no say in the evolution of your communal faith. And now all of a sudden it's totally decentralized. And you're having, sort of direct contact with divinity through, rabbi means teacher, and it's not hierarchical. So I was looking at the 4th century and thinking, God, it's really a lot like the modern world. So it was basically like, oh, things haven't changed much.
Right. And it's also like the Protestant Reformation. All of a sudden it's like, oh, we can read it ourselves on our Gutenberg Bibles. Oh my God.
Yeah. Right. Right. And I love that the Gutenberg Bible was funded by early, typeset pornography.
Yeah, much like my career, I was
okay.
Yeah, I do mean it literally. My first job, I was a political reporter at an alternative news weekly, which, it was extremely high quality journalism, but it was funded by the sort of prostitution and 900 ads in the back of the paper. And then I got laid off because Craigslist and the internet removed a need for that. And so, yeah, we lost a lot of great journalism as a result of porn going online.
Oh, wow. Have you seen the HBO show Minx?
I have not.
Oh, do you know about it?
No.
Oh, it's from the early 1970s. This Vassar grad is an ardent feminist, wants to start a magazine called Awaken the Matriarchy. She ends up in Los Angeles, where the only one who's willing to fund her magazine is a porn publisher. And the way they are going to empower women is by showing pictures of naked men.
There we go.
It's a great show. It gets at a lot of the complexity and nuance of bedfellows, literal and figurative.
That's great.
Yeah. So how'd you get into business? I mean, I'm hearing, Broadway and jazz and divinity and sports. Like what led you to a career in, commerce?
The whole filthy lucre question.
Yeah, I hope I said the word commerce with enough disdain. And
yeah, that was great. That was well done. Yeah, well, I got interested in all of this. I started my own business in 2006, and the immediate antecedent for that was I was a nonprofit executive director. And I had been doing that for 2 years. I was the executive director of a bicycling advocacy nonprofit, which, sounds pretty much as far from the world of business as possible. But I decided.
Where was this?
It was in Massachusetts.
Okay.
So I decided I was going to go out on my own. Ironically, it was such a stressful job. It was such a stressful job because this organization was pretty much entirely riding on me to raise all the money for it. I mean, it was a 30-year-old organization, but they had not done a very good job of creating predictable revenue flows. And the guy who ran the organization before me had basically landed a 5-year grant with the government, which expired when he was leaving. And then there was like no incoming revenue. And so I took the job, and it's like, oh God, I have to like raise everything. And so, it's a tiny organization. It wasn't a lot of money to raise, but raising any amount of money when you don't have sort of like a stable set base of funding is incredibly hard. So it was very hard, high stress work. And so I did it for 2 years, but I decided, this is very ironic because a lot of people enter consulting or executive coaching from these like super lucrative corporate jobs, and then they're sad and disappointed that they're making less money. For me, my calculus was, wow, literally anything I do, up to and including just donating my blood to the Red Cross, I will make more money than I am making working at this job. So it's only up from here. So it seemed like zero risk for me to start my own business. So I started consulting.
So when until I was about 30, I was a school teacher.
Oh, and wow. Who did you teach, Howie?
I taught at private schools. I spent most of my career at a small Quaker school in central New Jersey, Princeton Friends School.
Oh my gosh.
And mostly I was part-time. So like I literally didn't know anyone in my life who made more than $25,000 a year. And so when I realized like I need more money, I didn't even know like who to talk to. Luckily, there was one guy, the assistant head of the school, had been in business. And he was sort of, this was his second career. He understood. He helped me do some, what color is your parachute sort of exercises. And he explained to me one day, like, the amount of money you make in business is based on the value you provide to that business. I'm like writing it down because that was like a new concept.
That's amazing. So when you made your first foray after being a school teacher, what was that first thing? Did you go straight into entrepreneurship, or did you have a job at a company?
No, neither. I started working for Peter Bregman.
Oh, so you're working for Peter. Oh, wow.
Yep.
Nice.
I was his first director of marketing.
Oh my gosh, that's
great.
And
the conversation that preceded my hiring was, he said, "Hey, do you want to be my director of marketing?" And I said, "I don't know what marketing is." And he said, "Well, we're smart. We'll figure it out." Because it was 1999. He had just landed his first huge contract. And he, wisely felt like, I can't do this by myself. I need some help. And, that was sort of my introduction to the business world. And I was, marketing, a boutique consulting company. So the first things I went to learn about marketing, I went to Barnes & Noble and I bought Sergio Zyman's book on experiential marketing. This was the guy behind the New Coke disaster. And Philip Kotler on marketing, which was a bunch of papers he had written, neither of which was remotely helpful to me. And it took me 2 years to understand that like marketing is really about telling people your story in a compelling way that means something to them, which was a thing I would have written down if anyone had told me.
That's sensational. I love it that your first impulse was to market Peter with the principles of the New Coke guy. That's amazing.
Yeah, luckily we had very little budget, so I wasn't able to blow very much.
Well, it sounds like you did in fact figure things out, so that's awesome. So
Later, actually, I think Peter just sort of subsidized my learning for 2 years. It took me a long time to really understand. Actually, the turning point. I don't know if you remember this book. It was called the Clue Train Manifesto.
Yes, that was by one of the early internet guys.
Yeah,
which one
four
was
guys.
it? David. I'm trying to remember which one it was.
Weingarten. There was a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And they talked about like business having a voice, like when I made that little sort of commerce thing,
Yes,
like that's
David
actually
Weinberger it was.
Weinberger, yes. When I grew up, my dad was a labor organizer, and so my first full sentence was probably something like "up with the wages, down with the bosses." So for me to think that business could be a force of good in the world was mind-blowing.
Yes. And the Clue Train Manifesto helped you see that?
Yes. It talked about like what a business could have a voice for good. And I've come, I'm still bifurcated around that. Like still part of my DNA is like, oh, business, money, greedy, capitalism, bad. And there's also a part of me that understands like if we're going to get anything done, we better do it with business and not against business.
Yeah. I was reading a fascinating article in the Times recently about it was sort of this profile of this young woman who had been a Rhodes Scholar, and then she finished her Rhodes Scholarship, and then she took a job at Starbucks because she had decided to become a union organizer. So she was getting paid by a union, and then she also had the part-time job at Starbucks so that she could kind of infiltrate and lead the unionization effort. But it was written by someone who apparently 2 decades ago had been a Rhodes Scholar, and was saying like everybody was sort of in the centrist Clinton Blair sort of thing at that time, but that now a kind of quick back of the envelope poll of the Rhodes Scholars is they're all like super duper hyper progressive, pro labor union, etc. So even though the numbers have been dropping very steadily, there was the thinking that maybe if maybe that this is like an early indicator that if the elite is actually, these people who theoretically are going to be inheriting the reins of power in our society are turning toward this, that there might be more of a push in that direction. So it'll be interesting to watch.
That's interesting. I saw the headline and I did not read it. If I'd known that was the backstory, I was thinking like, oh, she just couldn't find another job or something.
Right. Yet another sad Rhodes Scholar. Yeah.
So what did you like about, consulting, about being in the business world after not?
Well, Howie, when I was in college, I went to my senior year, I went to career services like everybody does, trying to get some kind of guidance about, geez, what kind of job should I look for? How should I look for a job? It seemed very mysterious. And one of the pieces of advice they had, which is not illogical, was, okay, write down the things you like to do and then think about jobs that involve doing that. So I was like, okay, I'm in. And so I'm like, making my little list, but basically my list really only had 2 things on it. And as it happens, those are still my 2 favorite things. My list said, I like to read the newspaper and I like to give people my opinion. So that's it. So I tried for different careers, where I could do this, like being a reporter. Oh yes, that's good. I can read the newspaper and I can give people my opinion. But I got laid off. I didn't get to be a reporter. But actually being a consultant scratches that itch quite nicely. Your entire job really is giving people your opinion and they pay you for it. And it's fantastic, being a consultant or being an executive coach. So I think it suits my personality quite well.
When did you know you had an opinion that people would benefit from?
I always had a high opinion of myself. So the question of whether they would pay for it became a question of how do I convince them to pay for it? But I always felt that I had something useful to contribute.
Uh-huh. Was it based on sort of experience or just reading the newspaper a lot? Like I feel like there's something I've been missing about like, having a high enough opinion of myself. Like the way you said that, I was like, oh, I should, that's another one of those things I should write down.
Well, I mean, by the time I started, I mean, there were some gaps to be sure. I mean, for instance, had never had a job, actually an actual corporate job when I started my consulting career. And of course, now I still haven't, but it kind of doesn't matter because I've advised so many companies and so many people in corporate roles. Like I know a lot about it, but at the time I didn't, but yeah, I was able to sort of, I had an eclectic enough background that I knew that there was a lot of random stuff that I could draw from.
Mm.
And most people had not had that eclectic of a background. So I'd been a journalist, I'd been in politics, I'd run a nonprofit, all these sort of things. And so between all of them, it gave you a slightly different way of looking at things that could be helpful to people that maybe had only done one of those things or maybe had done none of them.
See, I love how you crafted a positive narrative from that. Because I was a school teacher. I used to deliver singing telegrams. I was a juggler and a clown for children's parties. I was a musician. And I hid all that when I tried to like be a grown-up. Like that was all. I used to direct musical theater for middle
like the most fun
schoolers.
guy at the party, Howie. Jeez. Yeah, you can't
I
be
was,
hiding that light under the bushel, man.
yeah, but like it did not occur to me that those were strengths, that they seemed like, sort of the gaps on your resume that you don't talk about. So I love how you looked at them and said, this eclectic gathering of experiences and talents is valuable.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about the long game, and then I saw you've just released a TEDx talk that I love that it was a TEDx talk about sort of using your time wisely, and it was only 8 minutes long. It was like half the length of a normal TEDx. It felt very good.
That's right. You gotta walk the talk on that one, man.
Let's talk about the long game. So there's a lot of, well, first of all, why'd you write it? What's it about?
Well, thank you. So the long game is, the subtitle is How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. And basically it is a book about how we can essentially kind of rebalance our mental portfolio, because so many of us, certainly during the pandemic, we were kind of forced into short-term thinking. But even before that, there was just this constant push toward comparing ourselves to others, to being stressed out that like things aren't happening fast enough. I need them to, go faster, go bigger, go better. And people were kind of driving themselves crazy. And so I wanted to write a book that hopefully would help contextualize that a little bit better for people and help them feel better making the smarter long-term choices that might not necessarily show up as being a great choice in the near term, which of course deters a lot of people, but might in fact be the much better choice in terms of the ultimate outcome that you want to get.
So I'm seeing a little bit of a distinction in the book and then in the TED Talk around, like when you just said, like for the book, it was this choice may not seem strategic in the moment, but it's strategic long term. Whereas in the TED Talk, you're really hitting upon something much more sort of psychological. Like this doesn't, like taking my time just doesn't feel good. It just, the engine is, like I've got to have my foot on the gas. Otherwise, like physiologically and psychologically, I'm uneasy. I'm wondering how those two, come together in your mind.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, the TEDx talk that I did, which I was lucky enough to get picked up on the TED.com channel, is called "The Real Reason You Feel So Busy and What to Do About It." And what I dive into, this is kind of a deep dive into a little portion of what I talk about in the long game, is that we all know we all know the obvious reasons that we feel busy. Yes, we have too many meetings. Yes, we have too many emails. This is all true. It's not like people are exaggerating that. But it is also true that for many people, there are kind of hidden reasons that are impacting why they feel busy, why they are making the choice to be so busy, because that often is a thing. We are choosing how we are filling our calendars. And so that's a little harder to excavate, because these are emotionally prickly reasons. And that involves things like needing to feel better about ourselves. That there's been interesting studies that have shown that, by Sylvia Bellezza of Columbia University, talking about the fact that busyness and status have gotten really tightly interwound in contemporary American society. And so the busier you are, the more popular you must be, the more in demand you must be. And so it's often a balm to our ego to be busy.
Yeah, I love that part about the talk where it's basically status posturing.
Yes.
Right? Like it's based, we think it's about achievement, and achievement is like a basic human drive, whether it's sort of meaning but really it's about approval. It's about other people looking at you and saying, "Oh, aren't you important? Aren't you high status?"
Totally.
So in terms of like the long game, we have to recognize that there's a cost to this moment, but you're telling people like the cost is in the future. So like a lot of the coaching I did before and I'm still doing before getting back into the corporate stuff, it was helping people with health. And so it was very easy. Like I didn't have to coax it out of people. Like, what happens if you keep doing what you're doing now? Like they know they're already 100 pounds overweight. They know they're on diabetes meds. They know their mom died of colon cancer. And they can see, even though it's difficult to do anything in the moment differently, they can see where they're going. How do you talk to people about the long game when it's not even, by definition, it's the long game. If you hold up the book again for people who are going to watch this on YouTube, there's a lot of O's on the cover.
So many O's.
Right? The law, it's hard even to connect this moment with the future. How do you help people get that perspective?
Yeah, well, I think, Howie, that one of the things that we just have to really recognize is there are goals that most people have that just literally can't, no matter how badly you want them, no matter how good you are, they can't be accomplished very quickly. It's it's like farming, right? Like no matter how badly you want the crop, it needs to be in the ground for 6 months or however long it needs to be in the ground in order to come up. You cannot speed that process up. And so, while it's true that, yes, there are some things you can make happen faster, a lot of the good stuff doesn't happen faster. And we have to recognize that, and also say, all right, if this is important enough to us, and this could be, something like raising kids, right? Like you're not going to speed that up. That takes as long as it takes, right? But if you claim, for instance, that you want to have a happy family, you want to be an involved mom or dad or whatever, then this is a process that needs to be handled over time. And so as a result of that, it's also true that the longer a horizon stretches, the more interferes with it. Like if there's a thing and it's like, oh, I'm going to do this tomorrow. I mean, it's true that like some crazy thing could come up, but usually not. Like usually you can do the thing that you planned tomorrow, right? But if you say, oh, well, this is a 20-year process and it's going to go this way and this way and this way and this way. Well, there are so many variables in between now and then. Statistically, it's probably not going to go exactly the way you're imagining. There's going to be a lot of detours. There's going to be a lot of doubling back. Things are going to get weird and frustrating and whatever. And so you need to have a huge amount of resilience built in. and, be willing and able to kind of get back on the horse and find a different way, whether it's about building a good relationship with kids, or whether it's about, oh, I'm going to become the CEO, or I'm going to build a startup that's going to IPO, or whatever your goal is. And so it's really understanding the duration of that process and being willing to have the perseverance to work towards it. Speaking of time and managing time and all these things, just as an FYI, I have a call at 4:15, so I do have a hard stop relatively soon.
Okay, well, let's manage it elegantly and gracefully, so I don't have to do a quick goodbye. Where can people find you and find out more about you and stay in contact?
Well, thank you so much, Howie. I appreciate it. The central hub of operations is DorieClark.com. And for folks who especially are interested in long-term thinking and strategic thinking, I have a free resource, which is the long game strategic thinking self-assessment. And folks can download that for free. It's basically a self-assessment toolkit to help you think through how to be more strategic in your own life and career goals. And folks can get it at DorieClark.com/the long game.
The long game. And Dorie is Dorie.
Yes.
And Clark has no E at the end, Clark.
That's right. Only room for one E, and Dorie took it.
Well, Dorie, thank you so much. I'm so glad we got this to work. I'm so glad that the early audio visual glitches got worked out. I've got to say, I started this podcast like 9 years ago, and the purpose in my mind at that point was just to have cool conversations with fun people and talk about the long game. Like, there have been moments where I'm like, well, I got to be really strategic, and I got to get someone who's going to grow my audience and someone who's going to cover this topic. And I've really come back to that original thing, like, just who can I have fun conversations with? And this is one of those that I had no idea where it was going to go. I know you had a book. I knew I wanted to talk about it, but I'm just so glad that we got this chance to connect. And I'm just really grateful for you being in the world.
Oh my goodness, Howie, it's great to talk with you. And thank you so much. It's really a pleasure.
All right, well, we'll connect again. I might see you in Nashville in August, and go get your 4:15.
Thank you, my man. Take care.
Okay. You too. Bye.